Hello, and welcome back to At the Table. I thought I would do another history video here, and this time the history of the Eldritch Knight. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, why not just do a history video about the fighter? Now, the fighter does have a great history to D&D, but it would take a very long time, and that would be a very separate video. I kind of want to do something a little shorter and explain the history of the Eldritch Knight through D&D's publication history. A little known fact, it's actually my favorite subclass of fighter. I personally love it, so I thought I would just do a history video for it. So what is an Eldritch Knight? Let's define that first. Now, an Eldritch Knight is a subclass of fighter that mixes martial capabilities with arcane practice. Now, the Eldritch Knight first appeared in 2003 as a prestige class in Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. It's originally introduced as a patch, a rules patch, to make multi-classing fighters and wizards more viable. Then it evolved into the iconic fighter subclass, blending martial combat and arcane magic, like I said. But what I find interesting about the Eldritch Knight is that, like I said, and I mentioned before, is that it was originally intended as a rules patch for 3rd edition. So originally, it didn't even start out as a subclass or a planned class to give to the players, more of a patch for people who wanted to multi-class, which I find very interesting. So now we're going to delve deeper into the Eldritch Knight's history in 3rd edition. There's a lot of ground to cover, so let's get into it. So Eldritch Knight was introduced as a prestige class, which allowed characters to advance both fighting and spellcasting simultaneously. It was highly customizable, but lacked specific lore and serving simply as a mechanical tool to build a functional battle mage. So I know a lot of people who are probably watching this are more familiar with D&D 5th edition / 5.5, so I'm going to give you a brief history of what a prestige class was. So in 3rd edition, prestige classes were a new advancement option. Prestige classes required meeting certain requirements that players needed to get. So, for example, they needed to have a specific skill or a specific number of feats or certain stats that they needed to meet before getting to these classes. And another thing about the prestige classes that it kind of functioned almost as a subclass for a subclass. So when you would hit a certain level, like fighter, let's just give an example, you'd be a fighter. Once you hit 3rd level, you would go into a subclass. Let's just give an example, battle master. Okay, so now you're a battle master. And then when you reach a certain requirement for, let's say you were trying to get to the Eldritch Knight, maybe you had 11 intelligence, you needed to get to 15. Okay, now we have 15. Now you needed this specific feat. So once you had that, that's when you could actually specialize into your class. So let's dive in deeper into prestige classes. Like I said before, prestige classes were unlocked by meeting certain requirements, such as getting certain stats, feats, being a part of a certain race, being part of a certain class, or joining an organization within the DM's world. But after meeting these requirements, players were able to get access to these prestige classes. Then they could take levels in that certain class to either exchange certain things that they would get normally in that level or add on to their existing class. And this would help players either optimize or make their class that they have originally more powerful. So another really interesting thing about prestige classes that I really want to talk about is that they were originally designed for the dungeon master. And it was more of a tool than anything else. And even in the Dungeon Master's Guide, even said that this was for the Dungeon Master. So we're going to get kind of more into those details. I actually have specific quotes. I have one quote from Monty Cook, which was the co-author of the Dungeon Master's Guide in 3rd edition. So let me read you that quote right now. This is a quote from Monty Cook. The original design intention behind them was allowed the DM to create campaign-specific exclusive rules and positions as classes. These specific rules offer abilities and powers otherwise inaccessible to PCs and focus characters in specific and interesting directions. So that's a direct quote from Monty Cook. Basically, this allowed the DM to kind of tailor their world, and also, if you wanted, have your characters and players be tailored to that world more specifically, which is kind of an interesting design mechanic that they were trying to shoot for, which I find very interesting. And then here's a quote from the Dungeon Master's Guide at the time. Here's the direct quote from it. Prestige classes were purely optional and always under the purview of the DM. We encourage you, as the DM, to tightly limit the prestige classes available in your campaign. The example prestige classes are certainly not all-encompassing or definitive. They may even not be appropriate for your campaign. The best prestige classes are for your campaign are the ones that you tailor make yourself. So that's another cool thing about prestige classes. They were highly customizable, and a lot of times in D&D, it was really up to the DM to allow you to even play certain prestige classes in the first place. So another thing about prestige classes that I find very interesting as well is that they were highly customizable to really fit the needs of your players, which I find very cool. This is things that Monty Cook himself has suggested for the prestige classes. So this is what he said. That the primary reason to create prestige classes are to develop an organization, race, or culture to satisfy players who have a specific request for their character development, and to make the underpowered character options more feasible, which I find is awesome. I love that 3rd edition really gave you that customizable feature like that for your classes. So moving on to 4th edition. 4th edition is pretty much the same as 3rd edition in the way that it had a very unique class system. So kind of like the prestige classes, they had something called a Paragon path. Now, what's interesting here is that for the Eldritch Knight, it did not even appear in the player's handbook or any sort of rules book. It actually appeared in Dragon Magazine number 395. So to kind of give you context, I have to explain what a Paragon path is. Like I mentioned before, in the prestige classes, I'm assuming a lot of people who are watching this video are more familiar with 5th edition, so I need to kind of explain how different 4th edition was to 5th edition. So a Paragon path was chosen when a character reached level 11. A character's Paragon path represents a particular area of expertise with your basic role in the party, giving a character new capabilities from 11th level to 20th level. The Eldritch Knight is a Paragon path introduced for the Knight class, which was a subclass for Fighter. It replaced the default Stalwart Knight path, and it was designed with that class in mind. So the same thing with prestige classes, that Paragon paths were very, very highly customizable, but I would say that the Paragon paths that we see in 4th edition kind of more represent overall subclasses than really highly customizable specific classes for your character. So I find that very interesting that there was a lot of them, but they kind of start focusing their attention more to default subclasses, which we're going to see now in 5th edition. So kind of now moving on to modern day with 5th edition / 5.5e. Now the Eldritch Knight takes all the things that 3rd edition and 4th edition did with it, and now kind of makes it more cohesive. So now this subclass, the Eldritch Knight, is now a core fighter subclass in the player's handbook. You can pick it right up from the player's handbook. You don't need another rule book or anything like that. But here's an interesting thing. I'm going to kind of go over the differences and improvements that they made to the Eldritch Knight in 5.5. So in the 2014 version, the spells that you could pick were only Abjuration and Evocation. You couldn't pick anything else. And with 5.5, they kind of eliminated that. So we're going to go over those details. Like I mentioned before, we're going to go over some of the differences between the 2014 version and the 2024 version of the Eldritch Knight. So in 2014, spells were heavily restricted, at least what school of magic you can choose. So you can only choose Aberration or Evocation spells. But in 5.5, the school restrictions can be completely lifted. Now you can select from any school of magic from the wizard spell list, provided that you have the appropriate amount of spell slots for those selected spells. So we're going to move on to war magic. So in This is a skill that Eldritch Knights get in 5th edition. So in 2014, allows you to cast a cantrip and make one weapon attack as a bonus action. In 5.5, War Magic allows you to replace one of your attacks with casting cantrip. This completely frees up your bonus action for second wind or another offhanded attack. Allows you to also scale with the fighter's extra attack. So that's pretty cool. I like that change a lot in 5.5. So you don't really necessarily have to attack as your second option. You can always just use second wind, the new improved second wind from 5.5, or do something else. It kind of allows you to free up your action economy a little bit. Improved War Magic is an upgrade to the War Magic ability that you get as an Eldritch Knight. So in 2014, it allows you to cast a cantrip and make a attack as a bonus action, kind of like the same thing as War Magic, but at 5.5, at higher levels, the improved War Magic allows you to replace 2 of your attacks during the attack action to cast either first level or second level spell instead, which is really cool. I really do like that a lot. It kind of frees up your kind of action economy, but also allows you to do something in like a desperate need. You can use a spell. Now, normally as an Eldritch Knight, you're not really going to be using your spells as a spell caster. That's not your main thing. Your spells are going to augment your fighting capabilities, but this does open up an option just in case you're surrounded or your allies need help. You can cast a spell, which is really awesome. Moving on to Arcane Focus. So in 2014, the rules didn't really specifically explain for your Arcane Focus. So usually you need an Arcane Focus to cast your spells from, at least from a wizard standpoint. And in those rule sets, it didn't really explain it or really kind of formalize it. So you kind of had to use your DM's discretion and kind of ask the DM about it. But in 5.5, they actually kind of cleared it up, and you can use an Arcane Focus. That was our look at the history of the Eldritch Knight and its publication history through D&D. I really enjoyed making this video, and the Eldritch Knight is personally one of my favorite subclasses in D&D, at least in the 5th edition, and I really love researching this topic because it really opened my eyes to see the history of the Eldritch Knight through D&D and how it started and now where it is today. Hopefully the next video of a history topic like this will come sooner rather than later, but I hope you guys really enjoyed this. I had a fun time making it, and I love making these videos because I like researching maybe more obscure topics online. I know not these topics are obscure or anything, but I don't really see these topics online or really to dive into the history of them, at least. So I try to provide that and at least my own spin of everything. So if you guys like these videos, please subscribe, like, comment, and all that good stuff. That really does help out. And hopefully I'll get to see you guys next time.